page 366. Unfortunately, there exist all too many human beings who are often of the strange and erroneous belief that hard and tough errors, problems, and difficulties totally exclude hope and optimism, and a pessimistic, negating, and negative attitude is therefore totally justified. But this is nothing more and nothing less than just an extraordinarily irrational false conclusion, because even the greatest errors, and the worst difficulties and greatest problems and so forth, always justify hope and optimism, because there namely always exists the possibility that, in spite of all arduousness, everything can be changed, transformed, and creatively constructively formed for the better, if only the necessary steps are undertaken, and one does not shy away from the efforts which are inevitably connected with that. Naturally, errors, problems, difficulties, and other assiduous matters can often be quite extremely unpleasant and disturbing, and contribute very greatly to leading a difficult life. But the existence of such terrible things and their conspicuous presence can never exclude hope and optimism. Were there no errors and difficulties, nor problems and the like, which can be recognized, analyzed, resolved, eliminated, and transformed by the human being into something better, progressive, and completely new, then among the entire humanity only inflated pessimism, as well as sheer negativism and presumptuous negation, would prevail, because there would be nothing upon which the human being could evolutively work. Every form of doing nothing, and quite especially in regard to consciousness-based non-development, brings not only harm into one's consciousness, personality, character, and into one's morality and mood, rather also into one's whole world of attitude, and into one's spheres of idea creation, whereby, inevitably, pessimism, negation, and negativism arise, which reach peaks which no longer allow progress, any kind of chance. Were the human being, and everything else that exists, not given the possibility of the progress, which can only result through the resolution of errors, problems, and difficulties, and so forth, in the truest sense of the word, there would also be no life, because, fundamentally, in accordance with the creational natural laws and recommendations, all life is constructed such that it evolves and works its way up to the highest heights. But therein is contained the truth, that only the life in itself can be creative and constructive and therefore evolutive, which means that the life only continues on and is progressive when it overcomes all those things which arise within it, and which first give it that substance which makes the life itself into the hope for a better, higher, evolutively more valuable future, in which knowledge, love, peace, joy, freedom, hope, optimism, and wisdom are understood to be the highest values of the life, and allow the progress in every regard of a consciousness-based, thought-based, and material form to become that which it also must be, according to the creational natural laws and recommendations, namely, the real and truthful fulfillment of the life. Errors, problems, difficulties, and other things of the same direction are signs of the life, and therefore an indicator for the human being that he or she, in fact, takes part in the life. This alone demonstrates power and liveliness, from which it can be concluded that a human being who is confronted with many errors, problems, and difficulties, and so forth, is also very much more alive and active than the one who, to a certain degree, simply moons away his or her time without hardship and carelessly or simply lazily, and is not concerned about his or her progress in the evolutive sense. A human being who is constantly progressively active will never get into the situation of being without problems, errors, and difficulties. Indeed, the human being must even be happy that as a result of errors, difficulties, and problems, and so forth, he or she has tribulations, because only as a result of these is he or she capable of achieving the abilities which are necessary to master and neutralize them, that is to say, to transform them into evolutive values. It is this actuality which must be taken on as one's lifestyle, so that progress and success can be secured and achieved. Also, as a result of this stance, depressions which can arise or have arisen from some sort of uncontrolled negative reactions are avoided or driven out. And if the human being learns to take this stance, then he or she also learns to hopefully contemplate his or her errors, problems, and difficulties, and he or she will see that in this kind and wise he or she copes much better with everything and everybody than if he or she is negating, negative, and pessimistic. He or she thereby also finds his or her life more beautiful, useful, and pleasant, because one of the great satisfactions in the life is to deal well and effectively with problems and difficulties, and to be able to recognize and resolve errors, and transform them into something more progressive. Besides, with this stance and successful handling of the life, the knowledge about the power of one's own consciousness and about the might of the thoughts is also built up, and one also recognizes the fact that the human being is his or her own guide and is himself or herself able, through the might of the thoughts, to achieve and construct everything that he or she ever needs and requires in order to cope with all situations and matters of life with which he or she is confronted. But what a sad, strange, and devolutive imagination many human beings have when they claim that it would be humane if all errors, problems, and difficulties, as well as all worries and grief and so forth, were taken away from the human being. They simply cannot and do not want to understand that all progress in every regard is thereby blocked and made impossible, because both the individual as well as the mass of humanity can really only thereby learn and progressively turn to the future. To reject worries, grief, errors, problems, and difficulties means to be devolutive and hostile to life, for which reason all who think in this direction must quite especially be clearly and precisely told and taught that they live their lives in order to fulfill their evolution, which can only happen when they confront all tribulations of life and confidently take them on, solve them, and overcome them. But that means that, exactly as it is with every other human being, they must first and foremost rely on themselves and mobilize their own powers in order to deal with their difficulties, errors, and problems, and so forth. Therefore, every single human being must help himself or herself if he or she wants to maintain his or her health and be progressive in terms of the consciousness, thoughts, feelings, and the psyche. The human being likes to think of himself or herself as delicately strung, and thereby thinks he or she does not have to confront life's difficulties and tribulations, because, on account of his or her alleged delicateness, others should do this for him or her. But exactly that is not the case in any kind and wise, because every single human being can only really, evolutively, and consistently learn from something when he himself or she herself makes an effort to learn and does not send others out to do it for him or her. So, results achieved by others cannot simply be valued as self-learned knowledge of profound evolutive nature, rather only as prefabricated knowledge which is adopted from others or from books and so forth. In this form, a knowledge can therefore not be progressive, rather it can only be piled up, without a course of learning having been gone through which is necessary for life, and without effective learning having even occurred, as a result of which there would be the following factors: that everything which needs to be learned is recognized in its basic values and inner structures, If the human being does not follow these guidelines of learning, then there always exists the fact that he or she truthfully does not further develop himself or herself, and is in no way a support and help for himself or herself. Rather, he or she continues to be reliant on the help of others, who, so to speak, pull the chestnuts out of the fire for him or her. Therefore, the fact remains that those human beings who do not learn to resolve their difficulties and problems, and so forth, by means of their own power, and recognize, analyze, and overcome their errors, can never really be helped. Unfortunately, the human being is not only uneducated in all these things, he or she is also unknowing to such a degree that it amounts to a true horror. However, he or she is nevertheless able to work his or her way out of this state, which equates to darkness, if only he or she is willing to do so. Some human beings may indeed have great difficulties and problems with that, because they are already so stunted in their volition that they can no longer strive to overcome the difficulties and other tribulations. But that is no reason to let one's head hang, and to simply resign oneself to one's self-created miserable destiny. In fact, there are many neutral, positive, equalized human beings, positive thinkers, optimists, affirmers of life, and those versed in life who gladly stand helpfully by one's side, and who gladly endeavor to provide their neighbor with all the necessary knowledge which is required, so that he or she can change for the better in his or her consciousness, thoughts, and feelings, in his or her character and morality and mood, and altogether in his or her inner nature, and so that he or she can fundamentally learn to really get to know himself or herself, and to change into a better, powerful, and constant personality, and to provide himself or herself with the necessary help in every form. Human beings who are strong, creative, and constructive do not confront problems, difficulties, and errors, and so forth, reluctantly. Rather, they do quite the opposite. They accept these as evolutionarily necessary factors, without which the life could not exist progressively. Rather, it would stagnate into the worst forms, or would even be devolutive. Everything which is burdensome in life, such as errors, incomplete things, deficiencies, contradictions, oversights, erroneous assumptions, failed actions, wrong evaluations, falseness, misjudgments, unvalidities, faulty procedures, derailments, misdemeanors, unvirtues, vices, slip-ups, offenses, problems, obstacles, impossibilities, predicaments, distressing circumstances, tricky things, dilemmas, confusions, laborious things, emergencies, annoyances, tiresome things, opposition, scheming, deceit, turmoil, complications, terribleness, and other bothers, are welcome values for the consciousness and its thoughts, for the learning and dealing with that which is necessary for life, in order to be able to fulfill the striving for that which is higher and for progress. The human being who thinks positively therefore grows with that, and thereby makes himself or herself ever more capable of coping with the life and all positive and negative things which arise in it. The most important thing regarding problems, errors, and difficulties is the stance which is adopted. The right stance, meanwhile, determines that the form in which the bothers, errors, and problems and so forth are seen and judged, and how they are thought about, is very much more important than the effect which they can have in reality when they are not overcome. Naturally, the possibility that problems, errors, and difficulties, and so forth, can be called forth, must not be disregarded, but it is not important for their resolution and for overcoming them. Therefore, the consciousness-based mental stance and attitude is indeed more important than the actuality of the fact itself. Naturally, a fact is an indisputable actuality which cannot simply be wiped away, thought away, or made to disappear in some other way. But unfortunately, for an extraordinary number of human beings, the actuality of a problem, error, or bother is the ultimate concept of the truth understandable for them, which means that they only see this one actuality which oppresses and burdens them, from which they are not able to free themselves, because they lack the power and the knowledge to dismantle the existing facts down to their details and solve their secrets, in order to gain a progressive result from that and to neutralize and eliminate the fact. This kind of human being is broken by an actuality because he or she makes no effort in any wise to undertake anything against it. Consequently, he or she all too gladly and too quickly gives up and throws in the towel, as the saying so nicely puts it. The convinced, positive thinker and hopeful, enthusiastic optimist always takes a neutral, positive, equalized stance in regard to all facts and sees every error, every problem, and every difficulty realistically and as a challenge which must be resolved and overcome in order to thereby learn and be progressive. But he or she also regards everything as a challenge for his or her intelligence, his or her inventive power, as well as his or her knowledge and his or her wisdom, in which he or she searches for insight and guidance, as well as cognition and solutions, in order to cope with the occurring facts and to gain from them the very most progressive element contained within them, which one must just search for, recognize, and make useful. Such a human being goes on thinking prospectively. Consequently, he or she also continues to research and search, whereby he or she also creates further cognition, knowledge, truthfully lived experience, and wisdom, because he or she allows the might of the thoughts to come to the fore and everything to become reality. Such a human being never becomes despondent. At most, in terms of his or her mood, he or she feels indisposed at some stage, which, however, he or she certainly quickly brings under control again, because he or she knows exactly that nothing is unachievable when it lies within his or her own powers and possibilities, and therefore he or she also knows, in this sense, that there is also always an answer to every question, and that this answer is also always found by him or her. In some case or other, it is perhaps also only necessary to change the facts somewhat, or to simply pass by them, in order to nevertheless overcome them, and to learn that which is necessary out of it, in order to be able to live with them. Consequently, with errors, problems, and difficulties, a compromise can therefore also be made and entered into, in order to live with them, as a result of certain changed circumstances and changes to the facts of the matter, without a further form of new errors, problems, and bothers arising from this. Also, in this case, one's stance and attitude in regard to the facts is of greater importance than the given facts themselves, because they are indeed brought under control and are mastered. In all the human being's neutral, positive, equalized, optimistic thinking and conduct, there is hope, enthusiasm, and striving, by means of which everything of which the human being can conceive can be mastered sooner or later. Therefore, one must continue to practice these values so that they continue to remain effective. Therefore, the human being should never give up, regardless of how unfortunate and negative the circumstances and situations are. with the help of the power of one's own consciousness and all achieved positive capabilities, and by means of the might of the thoughts, which is built up through all the powers of the consciousness and through the capabilities, all arising problems and difficulties can be solved, and all errors recognized, analyzed, and resolved, in order to create from that which is better, more positive, and progressive. Even in the present day, with the help of one's own powers, all tribulations can be neutralized, eliminated, or transformed into something better, as was also the case in earlier times, when the human being was exposed to fewer burdens caused by the environment, philosophies, religions, sects, and other worldviews, and caused by the general progress, and so forth. Number 1. With problems, bothers, and errors, one must always be mindful that they are not without use, nor are they simply negative. Rather, they also have a noteworthy, positive, and evolutive value. Number 2. With problems, difficulties, and errors, one must always search for a creative and constructive solution, which is also progressive and therefore positive. Number 3. Thinking in a neutral, positive, equalized form also means always being objective, realistic, enthusiastic, hopeful, and optimistic. Number 4. Problems, difficulties, and errors are facts of life and of progress. Consequently, the human being grows because of them and becomes strong, and his or her quality of life improves. Number 5. Problems, weaknesses, difficulties, and errors must be examined for their weak points in order to penetrate them there and analyze them in order to then work out the necessary solutions and changes, and so forth. Number 6. Problems, errors, and difficulties are, for the consciousness and the thoughts, what physical exercises are for the muscles. Strength and might are created through both forms. Number 7. The human being is able to cope with all problems, errors, and difficulties by means of the power of his or her consciousness and by means of the might of his or her thoughts. Therefore, in every regard, the human being must trust in himself or herself and in his or her own power and might.